Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. First, I want to welcome you on behalf of Books and Books, Americans for Immigrant Justice, and Miami Book Fair. My name is Claudia Jardinella, and I am part of the development team at Americans for Immigrant Justice. Briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with the organization, we're a Miami-based nonprofit law firm that works on a national level to protect the rights of immigrants in the United States. We do this through a combination of services, including direct representation, impact litigation, advocacy, and outreach. In South Florida, we are the only agency that provides free legal services to low-income immigrants. We have specialized programs to serve immigrant survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, unaccompanied children, dreamers, asylum seekers, families facing separation, and individuals in immigration detention. We are going to share in the chat at the end of these of the event 2 links so you can learn more about our organization and the different ways that you can support us. Also, just a friendly reminder, there's a button on your lower screen where you can post any questions you have in the next hour, half hour. Tonight, Americans for Immigrant Justice is proud to join our favorite local independently owned bookstore, Books and Books, and Miami Books Fair in this wonderful conversation about beautiful country. Every immigrant story is unique, but most share something in common. They all start with a dream to have better opportunities and a desire to be safe and free. Unfortunately, many times immigrants encounter a different reality. And this memoir is a story of a family that precisely experiences that. Like many immigrant stories, Beautiful Country is a story of struggle, of bravery, of overcoming adverse circumstances, and of the unbreakable human spirit. At AI Justice, we see thousands of similar stories in the lives of every client, and we hope our services contribute to these stories becoming stories of hope and triumph. We want to thank Qian Julie Wang for writing this book, because by amplifying immigration stories and sharing the reality of the immigration experience, we can inspire, we can influence, and we can drive true change. Now, I am thrilled to have the honor to introduce you to these 2 remarkable women for what I'm sure will be an exceptional conversation. The author of Beautiful Country, Qian Julie Wang, is an immigrant who came to the United States as a child and lived very challenging circumstances. She graduated from Yale Law School and Swarthmore College and became a commercial litigator, and she is now the managing partner of a firm dedicated to advocating for education and civil rights. Her writing has appeared in major publications like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and her story is truly inspirational. Not surprisingly, this book has become a New York Times bestseller, and at today's show, Read with Jenna Book Club. If you haven't read it, we really recommend it. Go to booksandbooks.com or visit any of their locations and get this book. And finally, to moderate this conversation, we welcome Evelina Galang, a great writer and activist of Filipino descent. Evelina's writing explores the experience of Filipino immigrants and first-generation Filipino Americans, as she is the first American-born member of her family. She has written many books like Her Wild American Self, One Tribe, and the nonfiction work Lola's House, Filipino Women Living with War. In her career, she has had numerous awards and academic accomplishments, and since 2009, we have had the luxury of having her here in Miami as the director of the creative writing program at the University of Miami. So welcome, ladies. The screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Hello, Qian Julie. So nice to meet you virtually. So wonderful to have spent some hours with your story. So important. You know, Claudia was talking about my work with the University of Miami, which I'm no longer the director there, but I did direct for a long time. And we have a number of young emerging writers of color, many of whom are first generation, either American born or immigrants themselves. And especially in this time, this political time that we've been in, it's been with Black Lives Matters and the pandemic and the anti-Asian violence that's been going on, it's been so important, I feel, for us to tell our own stories, to be in charge of our own stories, and to share what we have experienced as immigrants. And I feel like your story is such an excellent example for all who are looking to tell their truth. I guess maybe we can begin with, you could maybe share a little bit of the work, and then my first question is going to be something to think about is, what inspired you to share this amazing story, such an intimate and personal story, probably a difficult story to tell. So welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I just want to start off by thanking you, Evelina, and Americans for Immigrant Justice and Books and Books and Miami Book Fair for having me. I am so delighted to be here. Thank you all for choosing to spend part of your evening with me. So as Evelina requested, I will start with a very short reading, just about 2 minutes or so. And this comes from chapter 9, which is called Lights. If you want to follow along, it's towards the top of page 105. Mama walked me onto the wide streets that had signs telling us that we were on 5th Avenue. It was the cleanest and fanciest street I'd ever seen in Megwa. The storefronts were huge and tall, with men dressed in suits at the doors. Some of them were white, some black, but none Chinese. We stopped in the middle of a crowd of passersby, admiring the front of a store that had strings of lights adorning its face. With a twinkle here and a flash there, the lights announced that a show was about to begin. I held my breath and waited, gripping Mama's hand. Out of the corner of my eyes, I caught her smiling as the music began and filled the street. Slowly at first, and then all of a sudden, more lights appeared. One light bulb giving birth to another, then another, before spreading across the entire building, each bulb dancing to the beat of the music. And though we'd never heard the melody before, soon Mama and I began moving with the swaying crowd, shaking gently to the beat, joy vibrating through us. The whole world was dancing, and so were we. We exchanged another smile, and I marveled how, in all the stories of the gold-paved Megwa and the dangerous Megwa, no one in China knew about the lights of America, about how they were so delightful that they could stop us in the middle of the street, in the middle of our lives and our worries, in the middle of strangers living stranger lives, all just to fill us with music and hope. Tracing it all back, I know now that it was the moment I first became enamored with the idea of America. It was the first time I saw the beauty and glamour of the country, and really of New York City, though at that point, the two were one and the same to me. The lights and the joy among the crowd that night showed me all that the city was and had to offer, a completely different face of America than the one we had come to know. Finally, the beautiful country's name made sense.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was wondering, the story is so beautiful, like I said, and difficult, intimate, and personal. So there must have been something to inspire you after all those many, many years of keeping the story to yourself, not just to share it with the people around you, but to write it down and to offer it to the rest of us to read. Could you talk a little bit about the decision to write this particular story?
Sure. I was fortunate in that I was born to a dissident family in China. My father became an English literature professor despite all of the obstacles that came with growing up with that label. And he instilled in me early on the power of narrative and storytelling. And at no time did that become more apparent to me than when we moved to New York City in 1994, and I was 7 years old. I spoke no English at all. And I realized that developing fluency in the language first and foremost would be the first way to ward off suspicion about our immigration status. But as I was working on doing that, I found a world and a family and friends and books became my salvation. The public library was my home. It was where I felt safe and was not really looking over my shoulder so much. for deportation to come for me. And it was there that I found worlds of, Babysitter's Club was a huge favorite of mine, Sweet Valley Kids, Sweet Valley Twins, but even working my way up from Clifford and the Very Hungry Caterpillar, I found these worlds of safety of people who were living seemingly different lives from me, but who had similar dreams and wants and goals. But I never saw myself, people who looked like me reflected in those books, and much less people who struggled with immigrating, much less struggling with being undocumented. So I dreamed always of writing this book, but the shame of living with that status, the traumas of growing up with that, over time, I just told myself, you're never going to do it. So for 22 years, I didn't tell anyone about what had happened until 2016. 22 years after I stepped foot here, I became a naturalized citizen. And I walked into the Manhattan courthouse. There was a video of President Obama greeting all of us in the room, and he opened with, "Hello, fellow Americans." And when he said that, it just sank in how badly I had needed to be called American, how long ago I had truly become American, and yet nobody would ascribe that term to me, much less the president of the United States. And being a lawyer, I kept telling myself, like, oh, it's just citizenship. It doesn't matter. You're documented now, and that's all that matters. No, it mattered that I was a citizen. It created a monumental shift within me. So then going into the November 2016 election and watching the debates and the horrible language and phrasing and dehumanizing terms that were used, I realized that I had a new privilege to speak up, that at that point I was really making a choice to stay quiet, whereas millions of undocumented immigrants still did not have that privilege. And as a result of my having that privilege, I had a responsibility. And I didn't hope to speak for all immigrants or all undocumented people. There's no way I could represent all of us. But I did want to show the humanity behind the condition, that also it's not just struggle, but joy and resilience and strength. And I wanted to take away some of the stigma of that label and bring to light what it truly is like to live with that status.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing that. I bet your story is inspiring so many of the undocumented youth who are out there, who are struggling even as we speak and are running scared in this moment, so it's such an important story. One of the things I really loved about the work is that you chose to tell it in first person from the perspective of Qian, the little girl. And you really kept to it. I mean, I would imagine, knowing all that you know as an adult and having, the wisdom that you have, it was hard to keep some of that wisdom away, but to really unfold the story as she saw it, as that little girl lived it. And I wondered if you could talk about the importance of telling the story from her perspective, the little one's perspective.
Yeah. It was crucial to me, that choice, because I wanted readers to open this book and feel like they were getting on a train and experiencing everything, or getting inside her brain really and experiencing everything that she was experiencing at the time. Because I think the beauty of children is that they take whatever comes to them as it comes, without that adult editorializing, thinking, well, what should be happening? So filtered through a childhood lens, the situations are at once easier to take in, but also starker, knowing that it is a child who is seeing all of this and experiencing it. And I know it's weird to say this about a memoir, but I went into this book thinking it's not about me, right? It's about that little girl who I'm lucky enough to have gotten to a point to have healed her and parented her through a lot of therapy and reflection. And but I wanted to allow her to recognize and feel all the things that maybe she didn't at the time have the resources to fully acknowledge or take in, but was nevertheless filtering through her. And then she subsequently carried for so many years. So I wanted this to as much be a tribute to the immigrant experience and the strength of immigrants, but also just to childhood itself, because that is just one universal thread. We have all been children at one point, and we have all been at a point in our lives where we're that much shorter than everyone else, and all the adults are bossing us around and we have no idea what's going on. So I thought that if I could take away the boundaries and labels between adults and reduce it to this child's experience, that maybe even people who never immigrated would find it more readily relatable.
Right. I mean, I just love that, because it's like the world, the adult world continued above her. And there's a way that we catch a glimpse of that, right? We don't know all the details that are going on between, for example, Baba and Mama, but we do know that it's impacting her, and we see that in the way she responds. And there's so much about that I love. And the other thing is, like, there's this thing where she in the early years, she describes people oftentimes as reminding her of a steam bun, or, like her favorite foods. And I think that is also indicative of where she was in that time. And maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. And that a lot of those details came straight from my diaries. I had many notebooks where I kept many notes. I was very much inspired by Harriet the Spy.
I love Harriet the Spy.
Yeah, I wanted to document and spy on everyone around me in hopes of solving some great mystery, just like swooping in and solving the case. And that never happened. But it did help adult me in writing this book. And that was one thing that I noticed about little Qian's diary entries. It wouldn't say like, I'm so hungry, I'm so frustrated, I'm going to school for the first time without any food in my stomach and I can't focus. It didn't say anything like that. Instead, it ranted and raged for pages on end about how her classmate every day after school had to buy a strawberry shortcake ice cream bar. And why does she think that she's better than everyone else? And why does she have to eat it? And it's like, today I followed her again and I saw her do it. And it, from the adult reader, my perspective, I was reading and saying, why were you following her? Like, clearly there was something going on there. And so I wanted to very much transport that experience to readers as well, in addition to the act of learning English and developing fluency. For instance, the pinyin in Chinese that populates the earlier parts of the book kind of seep out as the more Americanized reflections grow. So in every way, in every approach, I wanted to understand this child and appreciate both her snarkiness and how sneaky she was, and how delightful she was in many ways, and convey that and share that with everyone reading.
She was sometimes I felt like she was parenting her mom and her dad, Mama and Baba, and I found her relationships with them to be some of them just complicated and beautiful. The change that happens, for example, Baba, who was so strong in China and who was outspoken, and who came home one day and said, I think I said the wrong thing. I said the wrong thing, and then has to flee. That's what I understood, is that he had to go. And then I don't know if it's like a few years later or a few months later, when she finally does see him, he's like a different man. And I wondered if you could talk for both that relationship with her father, little Qian's father, and her mother, how their characters, they have this trajectory. Maybe that's too big a question, but there is a way that there's all this hope coming to the United States for political, and all these other opportunities that we're looking for. But at the same time, something changes in each of them.
Yeah. It was hard back then in China, because in the 90s, we really didn't have any uncensored information about the United States. And that could very well still be true. I just don't live there anymore. So we didn't know what to expect, but my father had grown up on banned books. He told me that when he was little, he would hide books under his floorboard so the government wouldn't find it. And they would be works of Mark Twain and Charles Dickens. And as much as he was running away from China, which he was very much running toward America, because his whole life, his world in books taught him that America was this beacon of freedom of speech, of governmental accountability. And that was very much the vision painted in him. And when he arrived here, of course, there were a lot of nuances and layers that no book could ever have prepared him for. And one of those was, as an Asian man, as a Chinese man, he was perceived to be weak and not as masculine, and how that really changed the way he interacted with other men around him and other people around him, and in turn, the two women who really relied on him for a lot of guidance. I think it drove him to a level of frustration and desperation that I didn't ever remember seeing in China. Both my parents in China, I mean, we obviously were living under pressure and struggle, but they had this inherent joy about them, this playfulness that slowly, with their exploitation in these various working conditions, seeped out. And my mother was, I think maybe many of us can relate. My mother was godlike to me. She was all-knowing. She was in full control. She was wise. Whenever she was there, I didn't have to worry about a thing. And the minute we boarded the plane and the doors closed, she got so nauseated and motion sick. And there was no one else around. It was just me and her. And instantly that dynamic changed. My mother was no longer infallible. She was human. She was having a very human physical response to something that I now had to take care of because there was no one around. And I think immigrant child can relate to this. Once that dynamic flips, it's impossible to revert it back. You will forever feel yourself to be responsible in many ways for your mother, your parents, especially in this new world where it was easier and faster for me to learn English, easier for me to understand the mores than it was for her. And she was a math professor on the forefront of computer science technology. And here in the United States, she had to work in sweatshops and sushi processing plants. So it just felt like she was reduced to a child by the conditions that were imposed upon us.
It's such a, and yet, without giving it away, there is a happy ending. Well, here you are. There is a happy ending to the story, right? The other thing that I was like, that weighed on me as I read, was this very subtle and yet very real microaggression that happened time after time when little Qian was out in the world, when she was at school. I think about that moment when her teacher, Mr. Kane, brings her up to the desk, one of many times that he brings her up, and he pretty much tells her that she didn't write this, whatever it was, a piece, an essay that was before him, that it wasn't something that she could possibly do because the kids in that school don't write like that. And what was really painful about that as a reader was the response of little Qian, was that then she made sure that her pieces had grammatical errors in it, had misspellings and that kind of thing. And really it's kind of nods to a way of survival. And I bet there are a lot of people out there who don't understand what that is. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, because it was one of many times, and over and over again. And I was just like waiting, and I was cheering for her, and so excited to get to the end to see that joy.
I think the condition of being an immigrant, but really also being undocumented, means you have to not attract that kind of examination and focus and attention. So what the little me was doing was just like, well, if I make some intentional grammatical errors, he's not going to look so closely, and then he won't ask more questions. It's similar to when people say, oh, undocumented immigrants commit all the crimes. It's like, do you think we have the bandwidth to do that on top of everything else? We are trying to avoid notice. That everything we do, that became the prevailing mission to my 7-year-old mind. So you can imagine for a 20-some-year-old, that's avoid attention and notice. You see a cop, you pivot and run the other way, right? Like, it's everything I did growing up was geared toward that. And I have to say, that kind of messaging from society did not stop when I became documented, did not stop when I got my law degree. I had a teacher accuse me of plagiarism in junior high and high school. I had a supervisor accuse me of plagiarizing a brief when I was 7 years out of law school. And I said, how in the world do you plagiarize a brief if it's based on the case and the client before you? that just tells you that this person's assumption that an Asian American woman, an immigrant, someone with a foreign looking name cannot write, and it is more likely that she plagiarized something tailored to a case than the fact that she could have written this. And so, and with those instances, I have had to deprogram myself of this survival instinct of don't make any waves, don't rock the boat, just go along. And this was what happened to my father, right? In China, he grew up in a dissident family and so had this internal passion to speak up, but it was never safe to do so, especially once my parents had me. And then here it was especially not safe to do so because it would risk us all being deported and sent back to those conditions, or worse. And so I think all three of us were programmed with that. And I just had to, over time, realize, well, I am in a different place in my life now, and I no longer need to survive. I need to do things to push things forward. So the next Asian American woman or next immigrant who comes along and writes something is not accused of that. And so once I started to see myself as part of a larger community, as being past that constantly looking over your shoulder stage, which, you know, it's just natural for you to be in that mindset when you are in those conditions. Once I saw myself removed from that, I was able to then start healing and altering my actions. But my instincts, I mean, when I went to get my COVID shot and they asked for ID, was the first thing they did before they did anything. My instinct was to turn around and run. And it's still, I think, always going to be inside me. And it has helped me a lot. And, you know, it has its place.
It's the thing that I wanted to talk about too is this idea of community and the way your experience has brought you to this new place, and also your law practice, right? And I'm wondering, have there been many people who of your community, the Chinese American community, or the undocumented community who have been able to reach out to you since you've been in the spotlight with your own story, and what's that been like with them reaching out?
It's just been so healing. I mean, I obviously can walk in a room and see who else appears to be Asian, but never was I able to walk in the room and be like, oh, this person is undocumented. This person was undocumented. All of us are hidden by the definition of our status. And so I always thought that these experiences and the traumas were uniquely mine. And now just hearing from people and saying how they've had near identical experiences and memories and how they too found the strength and resilience to push through it, it just makes me realize that we are all so very connected. And I even connected with a classmate from law school. We sat next to each other in law school and we never put together that we both had this shared history until it was announced.
Oh, wow.
And so you see, like, there are undocumented people or formerly undocumented people everywhere, and we have to hide it. And that is where the shame comes from, that secrecy. But now that we're able to talk openly, I'm seeing the strength and how far people have come, regardless of all of the institutional barriers that are placed in our way. And I'm just so very proud to be. I mean, I think it's a gift. I used to think as a child it was a curse, but it truly has been. It's been a gift, and it is my duty and all of us who have made it out on the other side, our responsibility to keep pushing the dialogue forward and keeping our elected officials accountable to what they promise on the debate stages.
That's right, sister. You know, I can't have to tell you, I've had so many chills during this conversation. So many. And I don't usually fangirl, but I mean, the work is so important. The work is so important to tell your own truth, because when you tell your own truth, there's a way that it's like it opens up the key or gives other people permission to speak their truth, you know, and to kind of come together as a community to create some kind of change. In the last couple minutes before we open it up to the questions, I'm wondering if we have any questions. I want to invite people to ask questions. I'm wondering what's your vision? Like, if you could have anything at all happen in terms of the undocumented, the DACA community, the immigrant community, if you could make it all better, what would it look like?
Oh, I have so many answers and policy suggestions, but the recognition that this label of undocumented, the imposition of immigration laws are uniquely and directly targeted to certain people. There's a lot of colorism at issue. There's a lot of colonialism that still lives on in our country. There are a lot of white undocumented immigrants who don't face nearly the level of bias and barriers that many of us do. And I just want people to remember, Americans, documented or not, to remember what this country bills itself as a refuge, as a land of the free. People who dare to come upon its shores, the oppressed, the poor, are taken in. That is the vision that we are selling on the international stage. That is what is drawing people in. That is our duty to live up to, especially when our government is the one inflicting trauma, right, horrors, and deaths abroad. When those people especially come to our shores, it is our humanitarian duty, if nothing else, to take them in. And we should think about, who staked claim on this land and who got permission to call whom illegal or not. Because once we get to that baseline question, we realize that we are all legitimate, we are all human, and we all deserve to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to check to see if we have any questions. I'm going to wait a little bit. This conversation that we're having is one that I know that you're having all around the country. I'm wondering, have you had a chance to speak with Jose Antonio Vargas?
We have.
Have you been in conversation? I bet that was a wild conversation.
We have not done a public conversation, but we have exchanged a lot of private messages. So when he came out and wrote his piece in the New York Times Magazine in 2011, I was in law school. I was a second-year law student, and I was documented. And he, I think, came to Yale and spoke at something, and I showed up, and I was just in awe. I was like, this person is so brave. Here I am, terrified with all of these privileges that he does not have. And he's up there speaking up for all of us. And that was my first inkling that I had a duty to do something that brave. But I just took me a while to work myself up to it. We can't all be Jose, but he is my hero and inspiration.
There's only one Jose, and now there's one. There's only one Qian Julie. Fantastic. Yeah, I think I would love to see the two of you in conversation, and just, yeah, that would be great. Okay, so here's a question for you, and it's from a woman named Heather. When one immigrates from one country to another, how does that affect their feelings, thoughts about the country they left? Can you speak to your parents' feelings or your feelings towards China in this respect? Thank you so much, Heather.
That's a great question. I think it's funny because you look at the immigrant communities, no matter where they come from, and they become this frozen time capsule of their motherland based on whenever they left. So my impression of China is always going to be frozen in time in 1994 and before. And my parents are always just going to be based on that era of their lives. And we're not up to date on what's happening there. It's hard to get the true picture or image. So my experience of China is mostly filtered through my parents' memories from the Cultural Revolution, which was a long time ago and very unique and different. But that is my understanding of China. And I go back to China and I speak perfect Chinese such that people don't know that I ever lived anywhere else, but I can't read or write. And I'm definitely not up to the slang or any of the current popular music or media. So once conversation veers that way, I'm just like frowning and I don't understand what's going on. So people think I'm slow. I'm kind of like an alien. And my husband says this, it's like we weren't living in China. I was living in America. My parents were not, because it was a hard time for them to assimilate. And so we're just stuck in this limbo, the three of us. We are a frozen time capsule of what China was in the 90s. So while I do have opinions on what I read about China and what's going on there, and my dissident blood boils when I do that, I can't claim to say that I know with any accuracy the real conditions of what the citizens are dealing with over there.
does it still feel like home to you? Does any part of you kind of long for China as home, as motherland?
Every time I go back, I find that, especially when I'm speaking Mandarin for an extended period, a part of me is unlocked that is locked up in America in the English language. I am just softer, I guess is the term, like more emotional, less rigid, less logical, just more childlike when I'm there. And so every time I go back, I cry and I can't stop crying. And I'm around my extended family, and it dawns upon all of us how much we have missed, how many birthdays and Chinese Lunar New Year's and holidays we have missed. And I just start bawling. And minute I get on the plane and head back to JFK, it just gets contained in this box. So everything else is foreign, but once I'm around my family, it's that bloodline and that kinship is still very much alive. And it's both heartbreaking and joyous to be around them, because I'm so glad to be spending time with them and building new memories, but so remorseful about all the memories that we lost out on.
Right. I understand that completely. I feel you. Here's another question, and this is from Naomi. And she wants to know how was it growing up with other Asian kids who were born in America?
It was odd. And I have this sentence in my book where I say she was Chinese like me, speaking to a classmate, but she didn't have the kind of Chinese life that I did, where with the passing of a flight or overnight, things can just disappear from your life. So it was like, at least I was around people who looked like me and I didn't feel odd in that way. But in some ways it made me feel even stranger, because I felt like I should be like them and not be looking over my shoulder all the time, not be missing my grandma and grandpa because they had their extended family around. And yeah, it just, everything about that experience ingrained in me this belief that there was something inherently wrong or bad with me, that I was not reacting to things or handling things the way that my fellow classmates were. But I still have to say, I think I'm a lot more fortunate to have been around them, because I've since met immigrants, documented immigrants, who moved to places like Arizona and Texas and were the only
Wisconsin.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wisconsin, the only person of color, the only Asian person. And that is, I can't imagine what that would do, what that would have done to me. Yeah. So you are strong for having come out. You're the person you are. Yeah. It's remarkable.
Well, it's a test in some ways, isn't it? The kids that you were in school with at that time too didn't speak Mandarin, right? They were speaking Cantonese, and that was also a source of calling you out in some ways and treating you cruelly.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it was like, fresh off the boat was something that they felt more comfortable throwing at me, because their families had immigrated earlier. And it seems to be the case in the United States that Southern Chinese have immigrated earlier, and the Northern Chinese have only recently started to immigrate. And so they just treated me as if I was someone who didn't know anything, someone who was from the sticks. Whereas growing up just outside of Beijing, I was always told that about everyone else who was not there. So my mom at one point says our world has completely gone upside down, because everything we were told about them, they're not telling about us. And so I think it reflects, some readers have expressed surprise at this divide, but I often say, well, think about what a New Yorker thinks about Texans and vice versa. That's what's happening. I mean, that happens across all countries, right? So it was natural that it would happen. But yeah, it created a huge language barrier. It created just this cultural issue with us, and made me feel like I was a complete alien.
Hey, I wanted to also bring up in the writing of your book, there are phrases in Mandarin, and I'm wondering, like, as you were writing, was that something for you? And here at the University of Miami, I have to say, we really believe in multilingual writing. We really are practicing telling our stories probably mostly in English, but infusing our other languages into our narrative. So I wondered for you, was that something that happened just naturally, or was it something that you like made conscious like decisions that this is where I will use this phrase, and here I will translate, here I will not translate, here I will use I'll speak in context, or did you not even think about it? Did the story just come out?
It was a little of both. So the framework and overall approach was definitely intentional. As with, I wanted this to be experienced. So an experience of both how abrupt immigration can be on both ends, and also the act of assimilating, how gradual that is. So I wanted to put Chinese in there and have it phase out as I started becoming more fluent in English. But then I had to think about what are the big Chinese words for kids then at age 5 or age 7. What would have been the words that were central to my day? One was daren, which referred to adults, and how I didn't think adults were particularly attuned to many things that kids cared about. And then there were other, the names of the countries, China and America, were central. And I really wanted to have faith in my readers and not over translate. Being a lifelong reader, I know what it feels like when an author condescends to you. Yeah. And yes, my readers may not know Chinese, but I think from context, they could figure out what this word means as it reappears. And that was the faith that I kind of put out there. I was terrified, though, of using too much Chinese, especially in the beginning, and putting people off who didn't find the language accessible. That was another leap of faith. Like, I'm just going to believe in humanity and believe that people find a human interest in this, and will keep reading and feel this little girl growing up.
Yeah, I think it worked really beautifully. I don't speak any Chinese, even though my grandfather was a Chinese man who moved to the Philippines many, 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 many years ago. I have no, but for me, there is a way that the language invited me into this intimate space. I keep saying it's an intimate story. It's, it gave me insight into a place that I would have no other entryway, right? So I think it was handled beautifully, and I thank you for trusting your readers.
Thank you.
I see a third question up here, and I'm going to find it. Aha. So Chantal Acevedo, my colleague, and now the director of the Creative Writing Program at the University of Miami, would like to know if you're working on something new.
Yes. So I am working on a novel. I did have in mind to work on a second memoir, but given how stressed my parents were about this first one coming out, I wanted to give them a breather. I mean, they were still terrified that ICE might come after us. And, that fear just burns so alive, even though we're all legal. And so I just wanted to let them sleep easy at night. So I'm working on a novel that kind of re-examines the trope of the American dream from the other end. What happens when you've quote unquote made it according to that concept. And so it follows women of color, some immigrants, in the world of elite big law firms, to which I have had particular access. So it's a lot more fun. I'm able to be a lot more playful with it and build some intrigue. And the biggest thing I learned switching from memoir to novel right away was that I thought that I could construct these people in this world from the get-go and be able to control them, unlike the people in my memoir who I had no control over, and I just had to document what they were doing. So, but with the novel, as I'm writing the novel, I'm saying, no, you can't just create people and expect them to stay the same. They actually grow and change and don't listen to you, much like kids, I would imagine. So now I thought I had a plot in mind, and it's going slightly differently. So we'll see what comes at the end.
That's great. Well, it has to be working when your characters rebel and they do their own thing,
Yeah, that's what I would wish for, for anyone, any person I create. So good for them.
I just so love this thread in the story of your memoir, in the story of your life, of the way books have played such a strong, it's been like a tool of agency for you, throughout. And like there's this moment in the very, very beginning when they put you in the special needs classroom, which also horrified me. And you were the one that taught yourself English. You were the one picking up those books, the picture books, and like, I think, did you mention like the hungry caterpillar in there somewhere? It's throughout the book, there are these, you're dropping the titles of these different books that have influenced you. And they're such American books. They're such, the books that all kids at some point pick up, like Harriet the Spy, like the Babysitter's Club, things like that. It's been so amazing. What are you reading these days, and what do you feel like influences the work that you're doing now?
During the course of editing my book, I read and reread Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings
Yes.
times. My copy is over there. I would show it to you, but
mine's over there. Mine's over there.
Yeah, it's like covered with Post-it notes, highlights, scribbles. It was such an act of bravery putting that out in the world and daring to eke out a conversation about race from the perspective of AAPIs. A place where I felt like, even being a loudmouth lit courtroom lawyer, I didn't feel like I had standing to talk about it, because we're necessarily placed in this kind of middle spot, and the idea of the model minority is so heavily championed and touted everywhere that we can't, especially as Asian American women, feel like we can safely talk about the specific form of racialized misogyny that we all have to deal with on a day-to-day level. And so reading Kathy's reflections, feelings that I had numbed in myself, told myself I was being too sensitive about, seeing that she too felt those things and dared to put it down, I realized, oh, it's not just me. This is, again, a community, and we are also all facing these structural barriers and impediments. So reading her over and over as I was editing this book allowed me to find the voice to express some of the early challenges that my mother faced as a woman here, and I, as a growing girl, faced in New York City.
It's a really powerful book, and it sounds like almost like a support, like, a sister sitting next to you, like, go do it. You have to say it. You have to do it. Do it for you. So speaking of your mom and your father, and now that the book is out, and you're hearing back from people, you're getting these wonderful reviews. How are they feeling about having their lives on the page?
So I refused to give them the completed book until September 7th, which was this on sale date. Up till then, I showed them select chapters. I talked to them about parts that were in it. And my mom asked me for a year, can I read it yet? Can I read it yet? Can I read it yet? And I kept saying no. And in hopes of protecting them from what I was feeling, which was, what if this fear that I've had my whole life, that if I let this secret out, it's actually going to ruin our whole family? What if it's actually true? What if I'm being completely brazen and just being foolish putting this book out in the world? And now there are 100 days left until this happens. What am I going to do? And I didn't want them to be doing that countdown in their apartment in misery with me as I was doing it, worrying about ICE banging down our doors. And I thought that little mercy, if they didn't know the exact details of what was in the book, might save them and help them and shield them. And I do think, I don't condone lying usually, but I do think that it was the right thing, because I think there would have been a lot of anxiety that they felt leading up to it. So I told them I didn't have access to my own book until September 7th. And my dad was like, oh, that makes sense, because they don't print it, until it's available. And I'm like, sure. Yeah, it's not on my computer at all. My father, when my mother opened it that morning, she just started weeping, just endlessly weeping. And my dad read kind of the few pages and said, oh my God, this is very well written. I like your writing style, which, as from an English professor, I mean, you would know, is high praise. And then later that night, anyone who has an Asian father would know that this rarely ever comes in your life. He said, I am so proud of you. And he said that he didn't want to read it because it was very painful and they hadn't thought about that time in a long time. But with every page, he felt healed. And that was my wildest dream, not to have it even published, but that somehow my act of telling the story for us would give them some closure and healing and solace. And then the New York Times list was announced, and I was number 3. And my husband was like, we have to tell them. I was like, if we tell them, where we are, they're going to be like, everyone is reading about us now. Great. I didn't want to tell them, but we called and I was shaking and we told them. And my dad said, good, there's nothing we're afraid of now. And I don't know if there's anything better I could have asked for. That for me was bigger than the New York Times list. That was everything I never let myself dare to dream of. So I'm very hopeful that the act of putting this book out in the world is going to give us all that permission and amnesty to heal and then move forward and build future and new memories untied to this past that we never felt safe talking about.
Yeah, me too. The book is clearly shining a light in these dark spaces and holding so many people up. Someone made a comment, bringing tears to our eyes. Yeah, your story continues to bring tears to us, and just, it's a happy ending. It's good. It's a happy ending. And so, can you talk a little bit about the way your work now, your law practice, is in support of the stories that you're telling and the stories that you're writing?
Sure. And it was during the process of editing this book again that I realized how far I had strayed from why I went into law to be. So for people who haven't read this yet in the book, I decided I was going to be a lawyer at age 8 or 9. I read condensed biographies of Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I was like, I'm going to do that for immigrants. And find me 20 some years later, having all the credentials one could want in the legal field, working in commercial litigation, representing billionaires and Fortune 500 corporations. And I loved my clients. It was fulfilling and intellectually stimulating in a very different way. But when I edited that chapter about little Qian going to the library and finding that, I was like, what am I doing? Think about what she would say to you if she were here right now, because I was by that point so familiar with her. And I remembered how back then I thought of lawyers as these powerful beings. They were, to my mind, the opposite of being undocumented, because they knew how the system worked. They knew how to work the system. They knew how to do it for immigrants. That is the most prestigious thing I could have envisioned for myself. And what am I doing here, being another fungible corporate attorney? So upon that, there was really a fork in the road of me just continuing of this. It was really a survival mode, right? Like I was scared of being poor and hungry again. So I went for the jobs that paid the best, paid off the loans, and just stowed away money to make sure I was never hungry. But I was still on the run because I didn't feel like I was ready to confront the reality. I didn't want to look at what was still going on in immigration law and to immigrants. And I realized that I would never feel fulfilled truly in my soul if I didn't turn around and do that, because it was those communities who kept me going, who were my family, who I owed so much to. So my firm is focused on civil rights and education rights, especially for immigrant children, immigrant families, and children with disabilities. And what I am seeing now is that so much of the very same barriers are still there. And it's deeply frustrating to me to see the children 2 decades, 3 decades later are facing the same problems. In some ways, the dialogue has moved and there's a little more awareness, but then there was COVID and everything that compounded the act of being poor and undocumented, just made so much worse by this pandemic. So I see my clients and I see anew, and I'm so glad I wrote this book in the process, because I see anew how strong they are and how much fire they have within and how much they love this country and just want to be American. And there are times that I walk on the street in New York and I see an immigrant mother with her child sifting through the trash. And I'm like, that could easily have been me. And I feel like there's no amount of work I could do that would be enough to repay all the privileges I've been lucky to receive. And I just have to comfort myself with the fact that now I'm doing it little by little. And I'm just very impatient for more progress to happen for the next generation to grow up, because as I'm meeting them, I'm just so inspired by all of them.
Well, thank you so much. So it's like the story, your life, the mission, the commitment you have. It's you're not just writing about it, you're doing it, and people are reading and they're hearing you, and I'm pretty sure they're going to join you in the struggle. And you have a big fan in me. I join you in the struggle and solidarity. So thank you so much. I think I'm going to bring back Claudia, I think, as we begin to wrap it up, if there are any other questions. But Claudia, thank you so much for being here with us.
No, thank you for sharing that amazing story. And Evelina, thank you for your wonderful questions. I hope everyone here tonight enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope this exchange raises some awareness about the challenges that many immigrants face, and that you, everyone here, is inspired to support organizations like Americans for Immigrant Justice that work to protect and help our immigrant community. Again, if you haven't read the book, go buy it, booksandbooks.com. It's great. Thank you, Qian. Thank you, Evelina. And thank you, Mitch Kaplan and Christina Nosti, for this opportunity and for inviting American for Immigrants Justice to this event. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.